Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Jeb Fest and to the greatest session of every year I've been to, which is the one on accountability. So the three of us are going to be very unabashed supporters of why having a commitment to accountability that works matters. And so that's the punchline up front. And we look forward to a conversation. We're going to talk for about 2/3 of the time, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So please know we want this to be interactive, and we're really glad you're here. Please do come up. There's seats up front on the sides, and we're going to end on time. So that's why we're kind of stopping the conversation now and going. I'm Aimee Guidera. I have the pleasure and honor, at least for the next 60 days, to serve as the Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth of Virginia and serve in Governor Youngkin's cabinet. And it's been the joy of a lifetime to be in this role. And I'm joined by two of my dear friends and mentors and heroes in the education space. Chris Cerf, who has been just an incredible leader. Clap, clap, clap. It's good. Um, Throughout his lifetime, not only serving as Commissioner of Education in New Jersey, but also leading the Newark schools and also being part of the incredible team up in the Bloomberg Klein years in the New York City schools. So, and at every point, Chris has been an unbelievable champion for high expectations and for holding the adults in the room accountable for helping every single student succeed. And that's what this is all about. And you're going to have a great conversation. And then one of my dear friends, Christy Hovanetz, who is just the go-to girl when it comes to finding out what is working across this country around assessment and accountability. And if you don't know Christy, you need to know Christy. And my hope is that every single one of you wants to have a conversation with Christy after this session, because our goal, and I'm a really bad joke teller, so I tell all the punchlines up front, is that the three of us believe deeply that if we do not have a high expectations agenda in this country, and one that is focused on high expectations and rigorous standards, that we use tests as tools of improvement, and that we stand strong on that, and that we have an accountability system that tells the truth so that we know how well every single school in this country is serving every single student. We will never be the strong democracy, we'll never have the strong economy, and we will never be the America that we know that we all can be. So that's our punchline. And I'm going to spend 2 more minutes talking about why this matters to us, and we're going to open this up for questions. Um, if you go back, accountability, those three things I just said, which I think are really very common sense, they are under attack right now. And that's what Hannah and the governor just talked about in that first session, where people are saying, we don't really need standards. We just don't even need rigorous ones. We just need a couple sheets of paper that tell us what we think we need kids to know. Tests are under unbelievable attack. We're seeing it everywhere. And I'm not sure what happens when we start giving up on knowing how every child is. Well, I know what happens. I'm going to tell you why I know what happens. And then accountability is a word that people want to go away from. I have a piece of paper that my friend and colleague Cooper Conway is passing out. You can find it on our website at the Secretary of Education one, which talks about what we've done in Virginia, because I want to give you a warning. Virginia was the canary in the coal mine for what happens when you forget that high expectations for every child um, is the most important thing that we can do as people who believe in the power of education to change lives and to change communities and to reinforce our democracy. About 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Virginia basically systematically dismantled a system of high expectations for all of our children. And I've got the data to show you what happens when you decide to lower your cut scores, when you have the lowest definition of proficiency in the nation, when you don't really tell the truth to your parents about how their students are doing. We had the lowest definition of proficiency, and we also had an accreditation system, which is what we called our accountability system, that basically told every single citizen, parent, student, teacher that everything was awesome. Nobody was not getting accredited, despite the fact that our kids were flailing and student achievement was just plummeting. And when Governor Youngkin came into office, he said, we are going to fix this because we know that when we expect more of our children and of our students and of our schools and of our teachers, we achieve more. And we have the data to show that. What these two folks will tell you, what we'll talk about, is during 2 decades when every single state in this nation had a high expectations agenda that was grounded on rigorous standards, strong tests, and great accountability, we saw student achievement go up across the board. In every subgroup, we closed gaps, we raised achievement, and it was working. We had more kids reading and doing math, just like Governor Bush was talking about, than we ever had in the history of this country in 2015. And then guess what? People said, it's hard. We have to work really hard to get this to happen. And so we took our foot off the gas, and as a country, most places basically started to let things slide. I would argue oftentimes we sacrifice excellence in the name of equity. And that is a total failure. And I will believe that that is the power of having great data, is that longitudinal data allows you to see every child and get every child what he or she needs to succeed. And we're failing at doing that right now. On the third piece of paper, what you'll see on here, if you get one of these copies, and please share them, you'll see a bunch of sentences and statements about what several of our states are doing across the country that are following what Virginia did. And they're lowering expectations for what our students are. And they're dismantling testing and they're dismantling accountability. And I've got the data to show you what happens when that happens. And so we're going to turn into these two, because what we're going to talk about is why it matters for everyone in this room to go home and to have a conversation, whether you're in the governor's office, you're in the General Assembly, you're on a state board of education, to double down on having a high expectations agenda in your state. It is the only way that we can ensure that the American dream remains alive, that our democracy is strong, and that every single child in this country can succeed. So, with that message, I'm going to turn to our great folks, and I'm going to start with the first question as I sit down. Accountability. It means so many things to so many different people. And I just want you both to define, when you talk about accountability, what does that mean?
Uh, so, first of all, good morning, everybody. So glad to see so many of you here. We are in the midst of a education depression in this country, as you will hear in a moment. When people were following a playbook, which for which accountability played a central feature, we actually saw a lot of progress, particularly for kids in the bottom quintile and quartile of education. That sort of lasted through about 2014, 2013, middle of the decade, and has now plateaued, flatlined, and dropped like a rock. And that correlates perfectly with the demise or the pressure upon what we're here to talk about today. What is accountability? Accountability starts with a articulated expectation, a high standard. It can be as simple as, if you're a salesperson, that you're going to bring in $1 million worth of business this year. It could be, if you're running a restaurant, it's going to be that you're going to keep your refrigerators or freezers below a certain temperature. In education, the definition of success is and should be measured by how much kids are learning. So, and whether what they are learning comports with our definition of what is enough knowledge, enough skills to be prepared to succeed in the world they will graduate into when they turn 18 and move on from high school. Accountability is nothing more than saying, this is what the standard is, and we are going to measure it. We are going to measure it to see the degree to which that standard has been met. It can take a variety of forms. There's a softer kind of accountability, which is simply, frankly, exposure of one's performance. That is, we're not going to fire you. We're not going to change your salary. We're not going to close your school. But we are going to tell the world that in your school, 40% fewer kids are able to read compared to the average for other schools serving like children measured by some demographics measure. That is just cast the sun onto the degree to which expectations are met. And then there's consequential accountability, which can take many forms. I'll just mention one that succeeded. You can, both the forms it could take. You can, like, say it's not smart to promote a child to the fourth grade if she can't read. That's not good for anybody. When I was deputy chancellor in New York City, and I don't know if Joel is here somewhere, my boss and a great figure in the field, we closed 200 schools, close to 200 schools. Every one was a knife fight in a dark room, every single one. But we did that because they had resisted positive change for years. That's a form of consequence. We put in new principals, new faculties, new schools, and third-party validators have shown that was a wild success. That's a form of consequential accountability. There are many other forms which we will get to today, but I hope that answers your question.
Great. Christy.
So, when I think of school accountability, I think of it as five pretty simple components. The mechanics of school accountability is easy. It's the commitment and leadership it takes to actually implement it well. School accountability all starts with standards. What should students know and be able to do at each grade and subject? Every one of your states has a set of standards developed by your educators. We need to make sure that they're rigorous, they're comprehensive, and they really measure what it means to be on grade level. We then need to have a way to measure whether or not the students have met those standards. That's the assessment. And an assessment is simply a tool that tells us whether or not kids have met these standards. Again, developed by your states, implemented and worked on by your educators. Then we come to the accountability rating. This is where things get dicey in most states. We need to make sure that we are holding the system accountable for making sure students are mastering those state standards. And if they're not, we need to do something about it. We need to transparently report those results, and then we need to actually implement rigorous school improvement strategies based on proven, effective measures and practices that we know that works. That's the hard part. We talk a lot about school accountability and assessment, and all we're doing is tinkering with the tools and the measurement system rather than doing a lot of the hard work it takes to actually move the outcomes on students. Accountability and assessment itself is not going to change outcomes. It's the inspired action we get from those data that will say, we need to institute a 60-minute math policy for daily instruction. We need to institute high quality instructional materials. We need to require reading coaches in every one of our buildings. So, thinking about school accountability, it's really an commitment to our kids that we are going to make sure that they learn grade level standards. I mean, truly, America's prosperity and economic stability and social stability depends on what happens in our classrooms today. So when I think of accountability, I'm not thinking of it as just accountability for education's sake. This is for a greater good or a more common good. This is our future in our classrooms today.
So I'm going to jump in and build. I agree with everything you all just said. And how we're approaching our accountability in Virginia is we also see it as the first step in terms of improvement, right? Accountability has such a bad rap in this country because we think of it's a way of just uh, like wagging our finger at schools. And instead, it needs to be the first part of the conversation of, so what does this data tell us? And now what are we going to do differently to get different results next year and not even wait for next year in the next couple of weeks? So one of the things that's really important that we did in Virginia is that we don't even call our accountability system an accountability system. It is a school performance and support framework. And that was really important to have that and support framework in there as an equal piece. And we never talk about it as being a school performance system. It's a support framework because we are now going to prioritize resources of time, energy, and money to the schools and the students and the communities that our data is telling us need the most help. And we're going to insist that any dollars that go into those schools that are identified as needs intensive support are off track, and our other two areas that you can be categorized as on track and distinguished. And our goal is to get every single school in the Commonwealth to be a distinguished school because we actually believe that can happen when you are supporting your schools and they have what they need. And so Christy just talked about getting every kid to read. We now will make sure, to build off of the governor's comments earlier, that for any student that is identified as not reading on grade level and on track, we'll have an individualized reading plan that the student, the teacher, and the parent will have to read off of. And then we're going to monitor what happens and then see and report out next year to that community how many of your students who had an IEP basically for reading are actually making that progress. So this is about how do you change the conversation and create an appetite for using information as a tool for improvement. And that's what an accountability system is. It's an improvement system in my mind. And we have to have that conversation because in education, we're really bad at making sure that we say data is the end of the sentence. It needs to be the beginning of the conversation.
So I'm sorry.
Yep.
I just want to just quickly build on something. It's very, very wise. Just my colleagues have said, accountability in and of itself is not the goal. It is a tool to cause action. That's very important. But let me tell you what the starting point of this, which has been assumed in all our comments, but might be helpful to make explicit. Someone has to define what success is. What do we mean by success? And there is a long way from a national consensus on this. But if you define it as I do, and I suspect my colleagues do, as say, our goal, why do we spend more on public education than anything else save healthcare and Social Security? Why do we require kids to go to school? Why do we put so much time and energy into this, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or whatever? It is we want to be sure that every child, regardless of economic circumstances, regardless of demographics, regardless of the country of origin of their parents or their first language at home, graduates from high school having acquired the tools and the skills uh, to go on to a fulfilling life as measured by things like lifetime earnings, longevity, health, avoidance of contact with the judicial system. But that is the goal, right? And then the question is, you can turn that into certain subsidiary goals. Like, we know if children can't read by the third grade, or if they can't read at all, what that predicts in terms of life outcomes. So starting with absolute clarity about the purpose of this gives you the starting point for building your accountability system.
And Chrissy, can you talk more about what you see the purpose of public
Yeah.
education and how accountability fits into that?
Yes, absolutely. Alfredo, can we see our first slide, please?
Wow.
So, Up Up One Insights did a lot of polling back in August of 2025. So this is very recent data and information. The purpose of public education, based on a majority of voters, is to teach kids how to read, write, compute, and inquire. And those are the priorities that K-12 public education should have. There are a whole bunch of other things we do that are important and good and provide great character development for our kids. But those are the things that the public expects them to do. They also expect that we hold schools accountable by monitoring and measuring whether kids are on grade level or not. So the public is explicitly clear about this. I think one of the things that happens is we get so wrapped up in our educrat, edu-wonk, edu-world that we forget there's a whole bunch of other people out there that care a lot about education that we're not hearing from. So we need to be sure that when we're going back to our states, constituents want this. They want schools to be held accountable for whether or not kids meet grade level standards in reading, writing, math, and science. So our assessments and accountability should measure, are kids proficient in reading? Are kids proficient in math? Are they proficient in science? Maybe are they proficient in social studies? Should they be making year over year progress? Specifically, we need to be measuring and holding schools accountable for that. This poll also looked at whether or not the public was interested more in the way schools were measured or what we do about schools after we measured them. It was a 4-to-1 margin that people were far more concerned about how we respond to school performance than how we're actually measuring it. The mechanics and the measurement of it are the easy part. It's what we're doing about that that's the hard part. And I will continue to hound on this. I've done this for 25 years on measuring systems and accountability systems. I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I don't want to do accountability and assessment anymore. I want to get to the good stuff. So please, let's implement good assessments and accountability so we can take those information or results and do something with them to really improve the lives of students.
So this all makes total sense, right? I'm sitting here listening to what you're saying, like, who could argue with this? Why are people arguing with this? Like, why is there such pushback to this piece that we know works and it's common sense? And what you just described, it's like, who can be against it? And we're hearing from parents they want it. What's going on and why is this so hard?
Well, there are a number of reasons. Let me list a few. First of all, hardly anybody wants to be evaluated. And if you could have a job and nobody would evaluate you, you go, I'll sign up for that. If you're running a restaurant and the health department never came to measure whatever your health standards were, it's a bummer the day the health inspector comes, right? So there is a general uh, reluctance to it. Secondly, there is a very powerful, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but there's a very powerful messaging system that has been put out for years and years and years. And it goes something like this, right? It goes, oh, your child is just a number. Your child is not a number. We believe in the whole child. I go, what? I believe in the fractional child. Um, uh, uh, um, or you can't really measure things because the tests are imperfect. Trust me, you can measure whether a child can read a text of a certain complexity by a certain age or do math by a certain age. Um, or what one thing you hear is, well, the tests are discriminatory. Why is that? Because people who are not born to wealth and with a particular demographic tend to do much better on these tests in the aggregate. Obviously, that's a generalization. Therefore, there must be something wrong with the test. Instead of going, no, there's something wrong with the education system that is not providing it. And then lastly, I, among many people of my generation, made a policy mistake, and that is we kicked over a beehive when we said when the Common Core standards were coming in. That we were going to also now evaluate individual teachers in part on the basis of how much learning was happening in their classroom. That caused, and if they were here, they would agree, a massive reaction from the teachers' unions, who basically turned it into putting a howitzer up against testing in general. And then lastly, in wealthy suburban communities where parents are generally, kids are coming more or less loaded for success, not as much as they think, but often it feels that way. They go, oh, you're narrowing the curriculum. You're spending too much time on reading and math and not enough on anything from art to football. And that really resonates in some communities. And then lastly, I'll just say this. If anyone ever says, oh, it's evil to teach to the test, right? You know the conversation just ended, right? Anybody who has been a teacher knows that evaluation is part of the learning process. I taught AP US history and government for 4 years back in the Pleistocene era. And you know how that worked? I knew that at the end of the year, my students were going to have to write a persuasive essay based on their ability to interpret a number of primary sources and to demonstrate their understanding of some historical context or era, like the causes of the Depression or whatever. And you know what I taught? I taught them how to do that. That is effective education. That is not drill and kill. So all of those reasons are invoked in opposition to the kind of things that we're all advocating for.
The number one reason I think assessment and accountability gets a bad rap is because we don't like the results. And I don't like the results. Alfredo, can we see slide 2, please? This is why I don't like the results the last 15 years. We have gone from an era of No Child Left Behind, where our expectation was 100% of kids are proficient or on grade level. During that time, we saw more than 2 grade levels of improvement for our historically underperforming students, and we saw about a grade and a half improvement for white students. Not only did we move towards our goal of 100% proficient, we narrowed an achievement gap significantly. We had huge progress when our focus was on making sure kids could read and kids could compute, and that we expected every single one of them to be proficient. As soon as we let our foot off the pedal and we started implementing waivers while we were waiting for Congress to reauthorize the No Child Left Behind Act, and then we implemented ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, which now rule the land, states have been adding additional indicators to their accountability system that are taking the focus off of reading and math, taking the focus off of proficiency by using measures that are comparative, normative student growth measures, input measures, attendance and safety. All of these things are important, but they're not going to yield the results that you need to get a good, strong accountability rating. COVID made things way worse. I acknowledge that. It's been 5 years since we've had COVID, and we still are not seeing states rebounding. The frustrating part to me, we know what works and we just won't do it. And so, Alfredo, you can go to slide 3. This is not exclusive to 4th grade math. It's also 8th grade math. Slide 4, 4th grade reading. Slide 5, 8th grade reading. This trend permeates across both grades and both subjects, more pronounced in math than it was in reading, but we know if we teach grade level expectations and actually expect kids to meet them, they will. And we need to get back to that. We need to stop being insistent on changing our tools of measurement. We need to get back to measuring what matters, get back to basics, and then be more directive to tell states how to better teach kids how to do reading and math. ExcelinEd has 2 phenomenal policy teams that can tell you everything you want to know about how to implement good reading policy, how to implement good math policy. We know what works. We just need to do it.
So let's stay with that. And I'd love to just talk about your experiences and Christy, what you have just studying across the country over the last 2 decades. So what works in accountability? We've had so many different approaches. This is the beauty of this country, is that the states are the laboratories of democracy and everyone is doing this a little bit differently. So we have a moment that we can step back with these 2 experts and say, so what do you see that's worked? What is the approach? Is it about consequences? Is it about supports? Is it about both? I just would love to hear you talk about if you could design the ideal accountability framework, how would you do it? And one of the things that we talked about a lot, the 3 of us, not just in preparation for this, but over the last 2 decades, is courage, right? A lot of the reasons No Child Left Behind, I'm an unabashed supporter that it changed kids' lives and changed this country for the better. But one of the reasons it started to fall apart is that there was a lack of courage to follow through and act on what the data told us. And so I would want you both to also talk about that piece and the role of courage to actually listen to what the data says and what we need to do about that too.
Well, I think it starts with a message from the top, from the governor's office, from the commissioner, from leaders, political leaders in the state, about the urgency of a clear understanding about what we are trying to success. I've advised a number of candidates for a number of things, for posts that would have some influence in this field. And I say, look, here's what your campaign mantra should be. Judge me by how well students in our state are learning. Don't judge me by my allegiance to choice or my allegiance to preserving the status quo or by the number of kids in our class size. Those are all means to an end, right? Those are all, the end is how well are students learning, and are we fairly and equitably making sure that kids who don't have a head start in life are given the means to catch up. That really is the starting point. And if every single message from the top says, that's great, I'm glad we put more books in the library, I'm glad we did all these wonderful things, that's great. But however, so many of our children are not able to read competently. So I think it starts with that. The second is, and I think Christy alluded to this, you can measure almost anything, but if you start measuring everything, you're going to lose the key points here. And my own view is we should have absolute uniformity in measuring reading and math, and that is the floor. That if children can't do that, their probability of success in life is going to be diminishingly small. And whether they go into a career, a pathway, or whether they go to college, doesn't matter. And yes, you can add to that, and we can have a rich debate about science. There are people who say, SEL and mindlessness, and the durable skills. We have actually one of the nation's greatest expert here with us today to tell us about the measurability of that. But I will tell you, the more things you measure, the more focus there is. And secondly, you have to distribute it to the public in a way that is digestible, right? That's very, very hard. We've seen some beautiful graphs today because parents do care about this. They don't know what to interpret. And then lastly, and this is where I separate myself from many of my colleagues, most states operate on the basis of guidance, right? Here's a really good idea. Why don't you do this, right? And send me a report, right? As opposed to mandates. When it comes to how children learn to read specifically, there should be direction. This is how you have to do it. And lastly, I do believe in certain domains there should be consequences, meaning when a school is consistently failing, we need the information to know that we need to do a reboot, that we can't keep doing the same thing we've always been doing, and this time let's vow to do it better, which is kind of the mantra of what school reform has become. No, it's very hard to turn around a consistently failing school by simply throwing more resources at it. In fact, it generally fails. So I do think consequences are part of the package.
So, have we designed the perfect accountability system? Yeah, we have. So, when I worked in Florida back in the late 90s and early 2000s under Governor Bush, we did design a school accountability system that was A through F. We were among the bottom 10 performing states in the nation on every single measure you could possibly imagine. In the 8 years I worked for him, we implemented school accountability systems that were rigorous and held schools accountable for reading and math outcomes and graduation rates. We did not change our system or lower standards or expectations. We saw huge improvements in student outcomes. We went from the bottom 10 to being almost at the national average by the time we left office. That's huge. The next 10 years saw huge improvements as well. The leadership in Florida stayed the course. We broke into the top 10 and were rated number 1 in a couple categories for a while. They've since kind of backed off of some of that. So we turned our sights to Mississippi. Alan, I'm sure you're probably in here. Stand up. Some of you have probably heard about the success Mississippi has had. Not a miracle, lots of commitment, hard work, and it was foundational on the school accountability system. 13 years ago, we implemented an A through F system in Mississippi. They literally were the worst performing state in the nation. They no longer are. Right now, they're Black, Hispanic, and low income students. Best place to be in the country if you want to learn how to read. Or if you want to do math. Because while Mississippi gets a lot of credit for their reading policies and they've done a huge amount and monumental work in that, their math outcomes also improved. Why? School accountability. They weren't hyper focused on math like they were in reading, and they saw as good or better outcomes in math as they did in reading. Where else do we do? Thomas, I'm sure you're in here. Louisiana, stand up. All right, Louisiana just implemented their he's shy, school accountability system. They are the next state you will be seeing moving forward, like Mississippi did, in implementing student outcomes. We know what works. That's the frustrating thing. We know what works, but we're not willing to tell schools what to do to fix things and to improve things. So ExcelinEd has a model policy. Be more than happy to work with any one of your states to figure out how to make a system that is transparent. It's the first thing. People need to understand it, and not just parents in the community, but educators need to understand that. And the most important thing is we need to measure outcomes that are meaningful to students. We need to measure whether or not they're proficient in reading and math, not some points for basic, some points for almost proficient, some points for proficient, points for advanced. We need to measure whether or not they're proficient. We need to measure growth, whether they're making more progress towards the standards this year than they did last year, not whether or not they're doing better than Chris is. We need to know whether they're mastering those standards year over year. And we need to be very explicit when we report these results out to the community as well. So we know what works. And if it's not working, i.e., you're not getting good results, we know how to fix that too. So we can help you.
All right, moderator's prerogative to brag. I also know, because of the system we just built, it was built on so many of the successes that Christy just talked about, and over 20 years of studying and listening. And Christy came and testified, and so many people came and testified to our state board. I think Virginia is also going to be a model where we're going to start seeing student achievement. We've already seen it start going up, and it's just going to keep going. I won't be there to be able to sit in the front row of all those press conferences, but I'm going to be cheering it on, because it is based on what Christy just said. We know what works, and we need to stop just spreading money like peanut butter around, and we need to start thinking about how do we only invest in what we know works, because we have enough knowledge about what that is. and we know how to build these systems. So again, call Christy. She can help you design this. And please go look up the school performance and support framework in Virginia, but also this piece of paper. If you got, I can get more copies to you. It tells the whole story in 3 pages. So you guys didn't answer my question about courage. So I know you're going to, though. I know you told me you whispered, so I didn't talk. So I want to talk about the political nature of education right now and its impact on this conversation. So when I started my career in 1989 at the National Governors Association, yes, I'm that old. It was incredible. I would sit in a room with 50 governors, 55 with all the territories, and you could not tell who was a Republican and who was a Democrat when they were talking about education because they were so focused on this conversation of high expectations and ensuring that our public education system was the best in the world and that it was going to prepare every single child for success. And it was just a unified point. I now am talking the same agenda we're talking about in Virginia, and I've been talking about it for 35 years when no one knew I was a conservative. And I came into this job, and now people are telling me it's a far right political ideological agenda. That's crazy. That's crazy that we have so made education and something as simple and common sense of having high expectations and believing that all of our children can achieve is a controversial statement and a political one at that. And so I do want to send this back to you all and say, how do we fix this? And talk about the courage part in this because I think it takes courage for us to sit down in rooms with people we don't agree with and find that agreement and say, we cannot disagree on this. We have to work together.
Well, first of all, amen to your points. Most of my career took place at a time when there was a bipartisan consensus around the urgency of this, and the universal acceptance was broad. I mean, there were fringes on all sides who thought, this or that from the left and the right, but basically it was captured in the name of the act that was passed on a bipartisan basis, the No Child Left Behind. Not only the kids who are born into wealth are going to have a great opportunity. It was no child left behind. Nobody disagreed with that. And everybody understood that the playbook included high standards and measuring the degree to which those standards were being met and finding strategies to get everybody up to the same level. Look, I come from a state, it was mentioned I was state commissioner in New Jersey. I come from a state, and in response to the question about courage, where every time there was an issue, and this is after I left, every time there was an issue, the governor would say, we are number one in the country, right? And which wasn't even true, by the way, by any measure, but by some measure, between Massachusetts and New Jersey, it was reasonably competitive, right? And what what I would communicate in response, I was one of those pests in the press and the blogosphere, says judging education systems is like judging Olympic diving. Now, go, what are you talking about, Chris? There are two things you look at. One is the quality of the execution of the dive and the degree of difficulty, right? If you look at New Jersey scores, right, and you normalize it by the economic strata from which children come, and you look at Title I kids or kids from homes for one-parent homes, or by any measure, we are hardly number one. If you look at it, we are in fact we're not terrible. We're sort of in the middle of the pack. Courage is owning up to the reality of the need and never lying about that. That is the first thing that happens. Secondly, every hard in another time, I actually happened to be working in a White House, and I was writing decision memos and you realize that every issue that gets to the top of the food chain is kind of a 51-49, right? It's not like, oh, this is 100% clear that we should do this. It's like there are arguments on both sides of the ledger. Accountability, when you get your mythic yellow pad and put a line down the middle and you put the pros, there's lots of pros, which we all believe. There are some cons too, right? You do not want education to becoming drill and kill. That's counter-educational. You do not want to abandon all else other than reading and math. You do not want to do that. But what you want to do is get the benefits of accountability while mitigating and assuring that the negative aspects of it don't actually happen. Courage starts with the premise that there are going to be a lot of people who do not like that you are measuring their teacher, their child, their school, or their district. They're just not going to like, because often the results are inconsistent with the fantasy world, frankly, in which they often live in. Courage is saying, I am here to fix that based on objective facts. This is not something I'm doing to get more votes. And that is very, very hard to do for many elected officials. And it should be a bipartisan quality.
I don't know how to answer this best. When I started working for Governor Bush, what he was doing, clearly courageous, but we just knew it was normal. And I think that's one of the challenges right now is doing the right thing is being perceived as being heroic rather than just expected. And I think we need to get back to the expectation that just doing the right thing by kids is your job. I mean, it's my job. And we need to take more of a no excuses attitude. Every time we think about accountability systems or something we want to place in them, it's always, but this kid did this. And it's like, no, it's we didn't teach this kid how to do this. Or these kids come from this place. And it's like, no, we need to teach kids how to do this. And there's always an excuse for why something's not working rather than figuring out how to fix the problem.
Yeah.
These aren't lawyers. Lawyers always will give you an excuse. These are fixing problems that we know that we have. So I don't know how to get the best answer around or by it.
That
but-
was the best answer, both of you. Thank you. I want to ask people to come and ask questions if you have them. And as you're lining up to do that, I want to ask something and just share something I'm concerned about and hear your point of view on this. So, one of the things I'm hearing in Virginia, I'm reading across the nation, are issues of how do we have different definitions of success for different kids. And those that are going into career and all that, because this whole issue of a test does not capture the whole child, just that fractured child, that fractile. And it's this whole question of this doesn't, in my mind, this isn't an either or. To be successful in that or have a career, you have to have high academic proficiency and knowledge, or else you're going to be replaced by AI, right? That's just what we know is going to happen. The have-nots and the haves are going to be divided yet again with AI, and it's going to be a tool to widen that gap. And so the way to assure that is to say it's a yes and. We can prepare people for success in the skilled trades and using their hands, and at the same time have high expectations for academics. And we've done this before with skill standards versus academic standards. We've done it, and I'm starting to feel like this is going to be the new attack on the high expectations agenda. And I'd love for you all to talk about this because it really worries me.
So
And we'll get to you all.
the shiny new thing, and it's a good thing, is pathways. We used to say preparing everybody for college and career, right? But we really were focusing on college. It is a good thing to have career-oriented options for lots of kids. Uh, however, that does not mean you take the foot off the gas on reading and math. To the contrary, before you guide somebody toward the allied health services or to be a network engineer or whatever the case may be, to be successful in that field, to graduate from college, to get a degree, to get a person certified degree, you need to be able to communicate effectively in writing and in speech. You need to be able to do basic mathematics. I think at least through Algebra 1, but there are people who will fight that premise. What I worry about is as we chase the next new thing, which I actually think we should be chasing on pathways, is it will be viewed as a substitute for the teaching the foundational skills of reading and math. There are already some signs of that in terms of how it's assessed.
So I think some of those underlying subtext of this is explicitly work keys. And I know ACT is here. I've talked to them. We've talked a number of times at different levels. But one thing to be really clear about is what we expect for kids to go into college, same skills we expect kids to go into for careers. The reading and math skills are imperative. It might be different documents that we're reading, or different materials that we're processing, or different instructions we're following, but it's the same skills. And to be clear, Work Keys that gives the platinum, gold, silver, and bronze rating, although there are 9 subtests on Work Keys, the only 3 subtests that are included in the bronze, gold, silver, and platinum rating are reading and math skills. So, to be very clear, when we're testing Work Keys in college or career readiness, we're really testing reading and math skills.
And last thing I'll say before we turn to this long line, and we'll go fast, is one of the things I'm most proud about in our school performance and support framework is it's a yes and. We are rewarding schools that are focused on mastery, not just growth of academic proficiency and getting to NAEP proficiency for the first time in Virginia's history in 14 years, where we now have one of the highest definitions of proficiency. And it is you get scores for readiness for life, and so that at every level, for elementary school is about getting more students on track with the math and English reading proficiency, and in middle school it's about access to advanced coursework, because we know that opens doors and changes everything. And in high school, please look into this, we're really proud of it. You get extra points in the accountability system for the number of students who earn college credit, college degrees, and industry recognized credentials in only the high demand areas in Virginia. And 3, military readiness. And it's not exposure to things, it's not experiences which matter, it is expertise and credit that shows that you have mastered this. And so what we're trying to build is an example of this is not an either or, it is a yes and moment, and we cannot give up on our children. And to bottom line, I'll just call it's called tracking. It's called adults making decisions about which kids should do what jobs and what futures, and that is not the American way. Okay, with questions. I'm so glad you're here. I promise you, we will not leave until every question's done. Other people may leave, but we will not leave. And I'm going to say that we're not going to all answer it, so we're going to try to get through all the questions and just have people just jump in. Ma'am.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm a state representative out of New Hampshire on the Education Committee. We've talked about assessment and accountability and consequences. May I have at least 3 examples of consequences?
I'd prefer not to call them consequences because it's school improvement strategies. The things that I would require is, if a school is not meeting expectations in reading, implement the policy recommendations for our core reading policy. Require the use of science of reading. Require the use of a high quality instructional curriculum. Require the use of screeners and progress monitoring. Make sure that you are following all the science of reading based recommendations. I don't think that's a consequence. I think it's using proven and effective strategies. So that's the core thing. And the same example goes for math as well.
One, we passed a law that's we're a state that has such a thing as tenure, and we passed a law that if you have 2 consecutive years of an unsatisfactory rating, you lose tenure. No disagreement, no arbitration. You lose tenure. 2, at an extreme level, some districts cannot demonstrate their ability to be successful, and while state takeovers are generally not successful, in Newark and Camden, we had to do that, and we had really, really, really good results. So literally taking the authority to manage the school from the local school board to someone else on a transitory basis. And third, I mentioned before, the New Schools Initiative in New York City, being basically governance neutral and quality focused in evaluating schools, and saying at some point, while we'd rather not do this, rebooting a school with new leadership and new supports and new governance can make a really dramatic difference for kids. Those are 3 concrete examples.
And we promise we won't do this every time, but we all feel deeply about this. 1, prioritize resources to the school students and communities that need it the most. Act on the data. And when you prioritize those resources, mandate that they cannot be used on wasted things. They must be laser focused on things that work, and that there needs to be accountability for how you spend those dollars. And the second one is, again, to make sure that every parent, student, and teacher understands where every child is, and they understand what they need to do together to be able to do that. And oftentimes these are IEPs, right? We should have an individualized education plan for every child, but especially for the ones that we know are not where they need to be.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. So you talk. My name is Nicole Conragan, by the way. I'm from Parents for School Options, and so I come with a parent perspective. And you talked about No Child Left Behind, and my kids were growing up during that period of time, and so I got to see it firsthand. And although the numbers don't lie, the day-to-day experience in the classroom was that the teacher had to teach to the slowest part of the group. And so the rest of the group were floundering, and it felt like the advanced students were being completely without education. They sat around doing nothing. And so I took my kids out of that school and I had to homeschool them or school them from home with a curriculum. So my question is, how do we have the best of both worlds? How do we keep the accountability for all of the students and allow the advanced students to continue to grow?
That's certainly in instructional strategies. I think that school would have greatly benefited from a reading coach that would help come in to demonstrate how you effectively differentiate instruction. It's imperative that teachers are also given the tools and resources they need to do their jobs well. That should not have happened in that school.
Can I
No,
follow up? Oh,
no, you come to us afterwards. We good.
yeah.
Bottom line is, thing. We give credit to the number of schools that are getting more kids to do advanced work. Right? It's how do you incentivize the behavior you want to see? You can build any system you want that fixes it. And this is the deal. We learned so much by how we screwed up No Child Left Behind's implementation. Right? And that's the deal. The next greatest system is going to be built by someone in this room, and you need to think about how do you plan and incentivize for the outcomes that you want. And guess what? Systems get the outcomes for which they were designed.
Exactly.
Design the system that's going to get you the outcomes that our kids deserve. Okay,
So-
next question, real fast, and we're going to go. And I apologize, I have bad time management.
Hey, hi, I'm Wolf Landers from Wisconsin. We're a state that has, with our most recent report cards, no school districts in the lowest category. Our DPI comes out and says that's because we sort of measure growth so strongly in our report. Essentially, it's like 45% growth for a lot of low-income kids, 5% proficiency, and then the opposite for schools with no low numbers of low-income kids. I'm curious what the proper mix is. If you guys have thoughts, not necessarily exact percentage, but the philosophy around that.
Well, I'm gonna take advantage of the fact that you're from Wisconsin to say that one of the ways that the political forces that be has managed the challenges of accountability is to change the cut scores on the tests. So you go, well, all of a sudden we had a 20% gain in kids who are proficient, but that's because we meant you could be proficient. And I think I'm right in saying that's one of the things that Wisconsin did, and
Virginia.
right, and lots of states did. Some are being unwound, as it just was in Oklahoma. For example, do you want to take the rest of the question?
So, with respect to balance of weights and stuff, in elementary and middle schools, you want a balance of growth and proficiency. You want to measure proficiency by percent of students actually achieving grade level expectations, and you want to measure growth using a criterion base. So, are they mastering more standards than the next? We also like to focus on the lowest performing students and whether or not they're making growth. We can talk a lot more about weighting, but in general,
Call Christy.
balance.
Yeah, and by the way, there are very sophisticated ways to measure growth, school growth percentiles, and so on. It's not an statistically impossible thing to do, although you'll hear that a lot from some quarters.
Hi there, Tom Madonix from Florida, former charter school leader. Recently joined the board of a local, my parish's local Catholic school. Question about accountability in private schools. So I totally agree with your tenets of absolute uniformity in standards of measuring reading and math, transparency, digestible data. But being on the board of the private school, we're about 75-80% of our budget comes from the taxpayer through our ESAs. With homeschool as well, our accountability system, like we have some measures internally, but on the private side, we are kind of following those tenets that were described. So how do we keep two opposing sort of thoughts in our minds and retain the ability to function?
So I will tell you that what I'm about to say separates me from a lot of people in the choice community. So I acknowledge that. Um, I- if we keep in mind the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish in education, it's non-denominational, right? Whether a kid goes to a yeshiva, a diocesan school, or Exeter, or the local public school, the reason we're funding it is because we want to make sure that they have at least the minimal skills and competencies and knowledge to succeed in life. I don't know if she's here. I don't think she is, but there's a woman named Ashley Berner who's speaking across, I think, speaking across the way. She says, choice without accountability is very problematic, very problematic. And when you have accountability across the internationally, it's almost always paired with some measure of accountability. It doesn't need to be the same, but it can't be abandoned.
And we do.
Yeah.
We need to.
I know. So I'm going to now invite everyone who's in line to come up to the stage. I want to thank everyone who has stayed during this. Thank you for the conversation. Please follow up with us. I know that the three of us are passionate about this topic and we are happy to talk for hours about it. But please join me in thanking Christy and Chris for a great session.